Ryan the Youth Pastor has posted his response to my video entitled Biblical Contradictions. In fact, it's a 3-video response that is well done and thoughtful. It reaches a number of incorrect conclusions, in my humble opinion, but it is well done and thoughtful, which I greatly appreciate. I put links to Pastor Ryan's videos to the right of the screen here. Just a quick note to Pastor Ryan. I've been enjoying our exchange tremendously. It's been substantive, civil, challenging, and informative, all of which are very good things that one doesn't get nearly enough of here on YouTube, so thank you very much for that. Early in the first part of his 3-video response, Pastor Ryan keeps it interesting by making a bold claim. One might even call it a challenge. Take a listen.
There is no way that the ProfMTH can conclusively say that there is a contradiction between the accounts of Matthew and Luke in the birth of Jesus Christ.
Pastor Ryan goes on to suggest the following results from claiming that one can conclusively say that Matthew and Luke's accounts contradict one another.
To do so is to provide a false certainty about the clarity of the text, and the clarity of the details in the text. It's assuming that we have more details than we do, and so
I will respond with equal boldness. Not only can one show conclusively that Matthew and Luke's accounts of the birth and early days of Jesus' life contradict one another, but I've done precisely that here. By no means am I the first to demonstrate these contradictions, but I have demonstrated them here. And I should note that even some Christians, acknowledge the contradictions between the two accounts. Moreover, it's worth mentioning that as a matter of historical fact, Matthew and Luke's accounts are doomed to be contradictory. What do I mean? The authors of Matthew and Luke contextualize their respective accounts of the birth of Jesus by reference to certain historical events and political facts. For example, the identity of those who held governmental positions at the time of Jesus' birth. Now, these are facts that can easily be checked. Matthew says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king. Luke says that Jesus' birth occurred while Quirinius was governor of Syria. As noted in my previous video, the Herod to whom Matthew refers is Herod the Great, who was king until the year 4 BC. The Quirinius to whom Luke refers is Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, who became governor of Syria in AD 6, approximately 10 years after the death of Herod the Great. Since Matthew and Luke mark the date of Jesus' birth no less than 10 years apart from one another, the accounts are, as a matter of historical fact, undeniably contradictory, quite apart from the matters Pastor Ryan and I have been discussing thus far. So this historically undeniable contradiction hovers in the background of our discussion here, a discussion to which I now return. One of the many intriguing things I noticed among all the responses my Biblical Contradictions video received, and there were just under 100 responses, not including video responses, was that not one of the respondents took up my question about Matthew's characterization of Joseph as a righteous man, because prior to Joseph's knowing that Mary's pregnancy was divine work, he was unwilling to subject Mary to the penalty that the law of God prescribed for women who were found not to be virgins before they were married or who committed adultery, namely, that they be stoned to death. Were those before and after Joseph who followed the prescription of God's law unrighteous because they did so? Why would Joseph be deemed righteous because of his willingness to undermine God's law? In any case, as those who've been following this discussion will recall, Pastor Ryan argued that the Magi, or wise men, must have been led by the star to find the baby Jesus in Nazareth, not Bethlehem. This, in Pastor Ryan's opinion, avoids the contradiction between Matthew 2 and Luke 2, which has Jesus and his family living in Nazareth at the very same time Matthew appears to have the Magi finding Jesus in Bethlehem. I responded that Pastor Ryan's argument renders Matthew's account internally nonsensical. First, Matthew never says that the Magi went anywhere other than Bethlehem to find Jesus after they left Herod in Jerusalem. The second chapter of Matthew's Gospel has approximately 11 locational references packed into its 23 verses. With all of this locational detail, how very odd and inconsistent it would be for Matthew to remain silent about the Magi taking a star-led detour way up north to Nazareth, a city that Matthew never mentions until the end of the second chapter, long after he has, the Magi, departed for their own country. Second, Bethlehem and the identification of Jesus as Messiah are inextricably linked in the second chapter of Matthew's Gospel. Third, all the talk about Bethlehem in the first half of Matthew chapter 2 also sets the stage for what happens in the second half of the chapter. That is, Herod orders the slaughter of all males 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and the area surrounding it. How odd that Matthew, with his affinity for locational references in chapter 2, would not have bothered to say something like, "But Jesus escaped all of this because he was safe up in Nazareth." Fourth, and I think most important, the flight to Egypt in Matthew chapter 2 makes no sense if Jesus is up in Nazareth, away from Herod's baby-killing dragnet, down in Bethlehem. In the third part of his 3-video response, Pastor Ryan offers several reasons for his belief that the flight to Egypt does make sense, even if Jesus were out of harm's way up in Nazareth. I'll look at those reasons in a few seconds, but before I do, I just want to go back to the map of the region. Keep in mind that Nazareth is north of Bethlehem. Specifically, it's 70 miles north of Bethlehem. According to Pastor Ryan, in order to get to safety in Egypt, Joseph, Mary, and the baby Jesus traveled south, directly in the direction of harm's way, Jerusalem, where Herod resided, and Bethlehem, where his baby slaughter was underway. How does that make sense? It's like arguing that God sent the Hebrews back in the direction of the Red Sea to avoid the Egyptian threat. Okay, the two arguments in support of the claim that the flight to Egypt makes sense, even if the baby Jesus were up north in Nazareth. The flight to Egypt fulfills prophecy. Matthew quotes Hosea 11:1 in reference to the flight to and stay in Egypt. That what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet might be fulfilled. Out of Egypt did I call my son. It is at best exceedingly difficult to see Hosea 11:1 as a messianic prophecy. The son to which it refers is Israel, whom Exodus has God lead out of Egypt. When Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Since it talks about how Israel continued to worship and sacrifice to idols and other gods even after this, and didn't recognize that God was leading them, it seems at best a stretch to regard what Hosea says as a prophecy about Jesus. Matthew excises half of a sentence from the 11th chapter of Hosea, no doubt to identify Jesus with the Hebrew nation. Even if it is a messianic prophecy, it doesn't make sense of how Jesus was safer by leaving Nazareth 70 miles north of the killing intended for him and traveling directly in the direction of it. Second, Pastor Ryan argues that since Jesus had been getting a lot of attention, he was in danger no matter where he was in Israel. Herod could have gone to get him up in Nazareth. With all due respect to Pastor Ryan, and I do respect him tremendously, I must say I find it hard to believe that this argument was seriously advanced. It lacks any basis in the text of Matthew. In fact, it undermines the text. Herod believed that Jesus was in Bethlehem and was killed along with every other baby boy there. No, for Matthew's narrative to make sense, the angel must be directing Joseph to take Mary and the baby Jesus and leave Bethlehem for Egypt. Well, that's time. Thanks a lot.